I'm Corbett Wall with DV Auction, here with the cattle market summary for the week ending November the 30th, where I've come up here in the Midwest to do a speaking engagement with the Missouri Livestock Symposium in Kirksville, Missouri. Happened on Saturday morning. Very enjoyable time on there with a couple of guys that I really think a lot of, Tom Fry and Dave Bryan, and enjoyed visiting with them. And I tell you what, I noticed that they were recording that. I don't know how you get a hold of it, but a lot of valuable information was exchanged in that forum there. Went on for a couple of hours, but pretty good event there, and was glad to be a part of it. But looking back on last week's trade, stubborn board all week long, just continues that way. But determined cash on the fat cattle trade anyway. And your feeder cattle market showed a lot of gains and promise of being strong here through finishing out the year early in the week, but then some weather concerns like you get this time of year with a blizzard. Blizzard was blowing in western Nebraska and South Dakota and that areas, and I'm up here in northern Missouri right now, and it's wet. Southern Iowa, very wet. They had some snow there a few days ago, and the worst part of it is the temperatures haven't been cold enough to freeze, and it is just sloppy. And when we get a little bit more melting happening this week, it's going to make it even worse. But going to be kind of tough to place new cattle in areas right in the middle of the Midwest here early this week. But let's look at the board for last week. December live cattle futures, Monday was down 17, Tuesday down 22, Wednesday up just 7 cents, Thursday down 17, and Friday up 32 cents, with your December live cattle contracts ending the week at 116.92. That was down 18 cents for the week. February ended the week at 120.50. That was down 42 cents for the week. But everybody really looking at your spring board there. April, everybody's trying to tie some feeder cattle to that April board, but they got to be hard yearlings, the kind that'll put it on fast if they're going to be able to do that. And we're just seeing the end of that. The guys giving the big money for the hard yearling cattle. It's got some weight to them that can be tied to that April board, because we fall off big time when you start tying things to June as far as hedging. But April ended the week at 122 even, which doesn't sound too awful bad. But June, you look off there, it goes off $8.35 to June that ended the week at 113.65. So that's what everybody's looking at as far as buying feeder cattle right now. Your January feeder cattle contracts, Monday was down 22, Tuesday down 72, Wednesday down another 72, Thursday down $1.72, and Friday down 75. You talk about just dropping just like a rock. But January feeder cattle ended the week at 145.22, which is really close to what your cash cattle are bringing right now on an 800-pound steer. But that was down $4.15 for the week. Your March feeder cattle contracts ended the week at 142.85, down 307 for the week. Fat cattle trade was very positive. You know, if guys will kind of stick together and hold to their guns, these packers still need cattle. This might have been the last big push for a big harvest here early in December, that was still early enough that can respond to some holiday demand. But after this week, have a huge harvest this week and try to have another good one next week, and then we're going to start running into holiday interruptions, and then we'll get deep into the holidays. And this may have been the last big push for fat cattle this week until that week after Christmas, when the packers are start lining up kill for the new year. But we'd had a pretty darn good week of fat cattle trade. Through Thursday, there was only 23,500 head sold, mostly all in Iowa. In turn, Iowa didn't get the big push on the market late in the week because they messed around and sold too many cattle early. But the Southern Plains held to their guns for the most part, and waited until late in the afternoon or early evening on Friday, selling most everything at 118. A few 118.50 in Texas I saw turned in. from Consolidated Beef Producers. If you're wanting to sell your own fat cattle and you need a little help, call Consolidated Beef Producers from my hometown, Canyon, Texas. I tell you what, those guys will help you out. And you can help the industry out by joining ranks with some guys that are selling negotiated cash. But the Southern Plains sold at $1.18 for the most part. Texas, that'd be $1 higher. Kansas, $1 to $2 higher. Western Nebraska, Colorado, Wyoming. We talked about that for the last few months. They've been moving cattle from there and sending them out other places, sending them out west to fill some kill slots out that way, sending them down to Kansas to fill in some spots there. But they robbed Peter to pay Paul for too long. Now they've got a shortage up there at that country. That was your best market, $118.50 pretty much straight through live out there in western Nebraska, Colorado, Wyoming. That is $1.50 higher. And congratulations to those guys being able to take advantage of that the tight supplies and get some more market in there. Eastern Nebraska, still kind of a glut of cattle there, and into Iowa there, and still a lot of heavy cattle. For the most part, your eastern Nebraska cattle bring 116 live, 183 to 185 dressed. That was mostly steady. Iowa selling some cattle on Friday from 114 to 115 and a quarter, 182 to 183 dressed. I talked about some cattle that sold really well in northeastern Iowa last week. A friend of mine called me, told me he sold cattle 116 FOB, and there was a $2.50 freight to get them to the plant. That was a pretty good market, but for the most part, you got too many people selling cattle there, and then they're not sticking together. We talk about these packers sticking together, but they claim there's no collusion or anything like that. But I guarantee you they're not going to go flying off in one direction doing their own thing, because they've got to stay in there tight to work together to try to get their needs met. And you fat cattle sellers in Iowa, a lot of farmer feeders there that are not in the market selling cattle all the time, they need to find a way to get together. Call Producers of Omaha. Call Consolidated Beef Producers. Get to work with somebody, or maybe the Iowa Cattlemen's needs to have a meeting for you guys, and you guys get together and form some rules. Like I talked about several weeks ago, back when they sold those cattle on the bricks, you had rules. Nobody sold any cattle before this time. Nobody sold cattle after this time. You priced your cattle, kind of priced them together. You waited for guys to come look. You established some kind of a direction to try to get as much market as you can out of the cattle. But I'm getting blue in the face talking like that. But my buddy Sheck, he assured me, he says not all us Iowegians are dumb up here. He said I sold my cattle pretty good, and he did, and I'm going to give him credit for that. But box beef cutout values for the week last week, your trends for the most part did not change a whole lot. Your average trade for last week on choice cuts was $213.39, down 37 cents. Selects, your average trade for last week, $199.09, that was up 65 cents. $14.30 choice select spread, 601 loads of cuts, grinds, and trimmings. Pretty darn good. Let's talk about what's going on in the country. Our old buddy Trump, I tell you what, but we've got a great president. Don't listen to the media that's hating on him all the time and just down, down, down. Sure, he's a little bit gruff, and maybe his bark is worse than his bite, but he is working for us, guys. I've told you many times, nice guys finish last. And he may not be the nicest guy in the world, but you definitely want him on your side. Supposedly he has struck a deal with China for trade at the G20 summit. He made a statement there over the weekend that it's going to definitely be good, in particular for ag products. Going to be getting rid of a lot of these tariffs on both sides and trade barriers, especially in China there. And China can use up a lot of our ag products. I expect the board to be up big on ag products on Monday. We'll see how that works, and especially probably on grains. So if the grains are up too much, that might hurt your cattle and your feeder cattle in particular, but it's going to be good for cattle too. We've talked before that populations are huge and out there in Asia. And if we can get China to start taking more of our beef products, we don't have enough meat to fill their needs, because they really have a lot of people on there, and that is a market that is, the sky's the limit on how big that could get. And if we could start selling more of our American products to them, it could be absolutely gangbusters. But we were hoping to see that, and we'll see what happens with that. The weather is going to continue to be bearish on your cash feeders coming into this week. We're going to see how sloppy and nasty things get, especially in Nebraska and in Iowa. Like I said, here in northern Missouri, it's nasty and wet here and cold. But we start to look at your cash feeder prices for last week, how they ended up. Your real-time index on Cattle Market Central ended the week at 145.59 based on an 800-pound steer. That was $1.83 higher than the previous week. And like I told you, we saw a lot of gains, especially middle of the week, especially in places like OKC West, El Reno, Oklahoma, the nation's largest. And while I'm talking about them, don't forget, they've got their program calf sales this week at OKC West, those Oklahoma network sales. They'll have a lot of top quality program cattle there that have a health program and a long time wean on them, and the quality is that much better. When you get those better producers that get into those programs, you're going to have better calves. There's still guys turning weak cattle out, and be watching that, especially the Tuesday calf sale at OKC West should be a good one. But cash feeder sales for last week ended up steady to $3 higher on feeder type calves and yearling cattle. Your steer calves were sharply higher, especially middle of the week, $3 to $5 higher, ending the week still, even after they crept back a little bit. But instances sharply higher, especially on lightweight steer calves to turn out on wheat. You know, sometimes 10, 13, 15 bucks higher on some of them. Now your heifer calves, guys, just don't go after them as much, because they're probably going to retain those steer calves when they come off wheat, either go to graze out or then go on to grass with them. And they'd rather have the steer calves. But heifer calves kind of unevenly steady, but holding their own and showing some promise in certain markets. But like I said, turning lower late in the week with all that pressure from the weather coming in, and especially your guys western Nebraska and the north side and north side of Kansas on the west. The weather coming in there really made those guys back off cattle on Friday and Saturday. And I'm going to show you this. Fort Scott, Kansas, absolutely not picking on them. They're a DV auction customer. They share information with Cattle Market Central. They're on the National Beef Wire. They're our best Saturday sale that we have on there. In Fort Scott, I've told you the last few Saturdays they've had awful good sales on Saturday, but I tell you what, the weather coming in hurt them on Saturday this past week. And they had, look at these strings of 8-weight steers that they had on there. Had a lot of good cattle and load lots and bigger. But these 8-weight steers sold from 140 to 144 that we collected on Cattle Market Central, with this one lot of 105 head of 846-pound steers that bring 145 and a quarter. That's a decent market, and that is the market. But I'm saying it was a little bit short of what it probably would have been if we hadn't have seen that wet cool front coming in further up north into the west. But West Plains, Missouri had 6,000 head on a special sale on Friday. Crawford, Nebraska had 4,200 head, mostly weaned calves at a special on Friday, including these 94 head of 706-pound steers at $167.50. So that's a look at last week's markets. On the road here in beautiful downtown Maysville, Missouri, at the Tracy Taylor Building. Appreciate them letting me use this. But we'll talk to you next week.